everybody. I'm Rochelle Potkar, a storyteller and poet. People to me immediately become characters, sometimes inspiring, sometimes cautionary. Events for me become plot points, story twists, story beats, sometimes sourced from the newspaper columns, and sometimes what ifed. So today too, I will move between four parables and their realities, just like I like the way my coffee, to have my coffee, just like the way I would like to serve it to you. They say ideas like flowers and stars grow in the dark, but the emphasis here is on plurality. Not just one flower, not just one star, but flowers and stars. Parable 1. Once in a forest, a dense forest, there lived animals who least interacted. The eagle swirled in the skies and found its own prey. The wolves prowled over their terrain. The mice were very happy in their undergrowth. They all seemed to be happy with their success strategy. One day, food became scarce. The eagle couldn't find enough of prey. The hunting grounds of the wolves shrunk, and the mice had their habitats compromised and disrupted. Now, instead of competing for food with each other, they communicated. So the eagle, who had an aerial vantage point of watching the terrain, could still pinpoint food, prey for himself and for the wolves. The wolves, with ground-level cunningness and intuitiveness, protected the habitats of the mice. And the mice, with their underground terrain intelligence, searched for new routes of resources and resources. Because of that, this ecosystem evolved into a very resilient, adaptive one that was much better than the previous ecosystem. They not only thrived, but they also co-evolved, and that became adaptive, resilient, and successful. When I search for this parable in reality, I find it. Imagine a world where poetry and creativity are on a balanced scale against commercial sales and return on investments, that is ROI. Imagine that. No new writer and poet would have existed. I wouldn't have been standing in front of you if my thoughts, my verses, my stories wouldn't have a place on a printed page of a published book. In the Indian English literary landscape, it's the conviction of independent poetry publishers like Poetry Wala, Copper Coin, Dhawli Books, Red River Press, and Writers' Workshop, that have encouraged new poetic voices to come out with their books. They placed lyric over profit. They didn't look at the horizon of monetary recovery, but they just backed you for your poetic spirit and literary merit. They may have small distribution systems, but they didn't ask you either about your sellability. They didn't say, "Arey o Samba, kitne copies bechoge?" They just let you flourish. They cherished you, nurtured, nourished, and celebrated you. Similarly, literary journals and magazines that specially cover English and other translations are only financed by the editors and their teams, truckloads of labor of love and nothing else. They work tirelessly, relentlessly, like Usawa Literary Review, the Punch magazine, the Bangalore Review, the Jao Rock Literary Journal, and the Bombay Literary Magazine, and many others. These are the editors that have kept the habitats protected of new and old voices, becoming the ecosystems and sanctuaries of our times. Parable 2. Once there was a village of silence. It was a handloom weaver's village. But each house had an independent loom, and its family members would weave tapestries. Tapestries usually of the history of the village. One fine day, they saw that the tapestries they were weaving had turned dull. The colors had faded. The thread was frayed. Everything seemed dull and slack of every house. Not only that, a grey fog collected atop the village. A little girl observed this the most. So she went to the village elder and asked him about what's going on. And the village elder said, "We don't talk amid ourselves. Our hearts are growing cold and distant. We don't exchange threads between each other." So she went around the village and asked the villagers to come and weave together. First, the villagers were very hesitant, but then they relented. They came to weave side by side. And as they did so, they shared their laughter and joy, their trials and struggles, their dreams and hopes for the future. And what happened to their tapestries? It suddenly sprung up with all the color. The threads became so lush and glossy. The tapestries joined themselves to a big tapestry of shared experiences, of conjoined histories. And this became the village of shared histories and experiences. When I look for this, in reality, I find so many examples. But the one closest to me is when I am a poet, we don't have a poets guild. When I am an author, we don't have an authors guild. But come as a screenwriter to the film industry and you have a Writers Association, SWA. So I wondered, why do we need a Screenwriters Association if we don't have for poetry and we don't have for fiction? And what I realized is that as a screenwriter, you are the first compartment or the engine of a very long train of many compartments. And by the time you reach the last compartment, that is the post-production, release, those glitzy events, posters and hoardings, you could all be forgotten as to who created the story world, in whose mind were the characters first conjured, who wrote the first word of the world on paper, who thought of traits and twists. And to break this amnesia, the Screenwriters Association works hard in its advocacy to protect the rights of screenwriters with respect to payments and credits. Not only that, the advocacy is so strong that they created something called the Screenwriters Rights Association of India, SRAI, which is a legal body, a copyright society to protect the creative copyright of a screenwriter. Not only that, they're still pushing further for minimum basic contract of payments in concurrence with producers so that writers get their due because they start at the beginning where you can't even see at the end who were they. Now I wonder sometimes, helmed at this organization are very seasoned and senior screenwriters. Anjum Rajabali, Javed Akhtar, Juhi Chaturvedi, Zamam Habib, and many others. They are well placed. They are well settled, famous. Why do they need to fight for our rights? They don't need it. But they are still doing it. And my rhetorical answer is, I hope someday that we and I are in that place that we can fight for the rights of our fellow writers in a pay it forward manner. This then becomes the village of weavers that sit together and weave and connect the tapestries of joint histories and traditions. Parable 3. Once there was a community garden in which grew 3 wonderful plants who were very proud of themselves. The sunflower with its long neck looked up at the sun and shined its face. very proud of itself. The tomato plant that had these cherub lal lal gal wale tomato and was very, snug about itself. And the strawberry bush that had lovely berries. They all thought and celebrated their individual achievements. One day, the water table decreased and the water became scarce. So naturally, these plants suddenly faced the peril of perishability. Now they were worried. What do? Standing far away at the edge of the garden was an oak tree, an old oak tree. It immediately sensed the peril of these plants and sent its underground network of roots far inside the terrain to reach these plants, intertwine with their roots and provide them with a hidden nourishment of water. Soon the plants came to life again and they realized they are not alone. They may thrive alone, but suddenly there is some invisible help that comes to them when they require in a very intuitive, telepathic way. And that's what they realized, that they really belong to the garden as much as the garden belongs to them. In 2015, I was selected for the International Writing Program, IWP Iowa. I represented India and I presented Indian literature at Iowa. And I was amid 35 other writers and poets from across the world who confluenced in a common room of the Iowa House Hotel, sharing our poetry and our translations and our stories. And it felt so magical that the whole world of storytellers and poets were in one room, and that common room was the world. Iowa itself is like a bubble, a paradise. It's a UNESCO City of World Literature, but even on its potholes lids, you will find proverbs engraved. On its park benches, you will find another proverb. Anybody you meet will be doing a thesis or dissertation or working on a manuscript. It seems otherworldly. At the heart of Iowa IWP is a poet, Christopher Merrill, who heads this and helms this writing program that runs for the longest years you could think of. Every year inviting fellows and scholars on 3-month residencies. There are many other programs running in Iowa for writers and poets. But if it wasn't for the vision of this poet to be that oak tree and call all the saplings to this large garden, I don't know what would be as life-changing as that. In 1967, the vision of this oak tree came from Paul Engel, who actually thought that if he invited poets and writers from around the world, he would platform everybody. Chris Merrill believes that he's not just into literary ambassadorship, but when you cross borders with words and ideas, you create global empathy. The whole world is yours. Even the last Nobel Prize Literature prize winner, Han Kang, was an Iowa alumna. When I came back from Iowa, I came back as a little oak tree sapling, thinking of what can I do to connect other new writers, poets, and create the same garden of a community. The fourth parable. Once there was a river that gushed wild and free into a waterfall in a valley. It was so wild and free that it had nothing else competing with it, almost like a melting Milky Way. Near its side on the beds was a small pond, and that pond just reflected the sky and the sun. The river kept gushing, but one day it just stopped and asked the pond, "Are you even alive? Because your shape seems to be the same. You're not moving. You're doing nothing. Are you even there?" And the pond said, "You keep rushing and gushing so wildly. You pass through many things. Do you connect with anything?" The river shrugged its way and went off. Seasons changed. One day, a drought hit the valley. The river's course began to thin. Its stream began thinning to a trickle. It became very, very thin. But on the other side, the pond was as stable, and it was also an oasis now for thirsty creatures and plants. The river went up to the pond and asked it one day, "How come you have survived when I haven't?" And the pond said, "I have just been still, not just reflecting the sky and the sea and the stars and the clouds, but also listening to the land, welcoming its seepage and percolation, and collecting and collating water for thirsty creatures and plants." That's what happens sometimes when you don't move in a great flurry and hurry, but just keep your palms still. You may get a lot more. When I think of ponds, I think of the slow living that needs to happen in this flurry of existence. And I think of little retreats and residencies that writers enjoy in India, because there are very few of them. And one of them, I think, is the Himalayan Writing Retreat that was co-founded by Chetan Mahajan and Vandita Dubey. It's a little place in the hills, Satkol, Uttarakhand, and it invites writers of all ages and stages who are interested in every form. It could be journalism, non-fiction, fiction, poetry. Even I'm part of the poetry workshop teacher or mentor circle. But when the writers come in there, they can imagine new realities, create connections, reimagine books, go home with great ideas, great dreams that they couldn't talk of anywhere else. In that hill and mist-kissed pond that's of stillness and solitude, they go back refreshed. Another crucible of collaboration similarly is the Dosti House, American library in our very own BKC Bandra, that has the same kind of feeling in a small white space where you can come and collaborate, strike up new programs, conduct workshops, encourage new voices, and just change your life in one single evening. Sometimes I think that individual progress is great, but we cannot stand alone. We always stand together. Our progress is never linear, but it is more like concentric expanding circles of mutual transformation. And that is the only way to not just evolve, but also thrive. So my friends, where and how are you planning to involve yourself today? How are you planning to evolve today? As I go back to the bonfire of storytelling and the poetic forest of birdsong. Thank you.